I'm glad to see so many people walking in the door already. And if you don't mind, we'd love to know who you are. And if you would just pop in the chat who you are and where you're from, we'll be very happy to say hello. And I already see lots of friends coming in. Cynthia Colebrook. Hello, Lois Bunce. Good to see you, Lois. Katie Brands, Keela Hanrahan. Lots of my friends that I see walking in the door. But if you'd like to say hello, just pop it in the chat who you are and where you're from. All righty. So we've got people still streaming in the door. We'll be starting probably about 2 minutes after 12. So we'll wait just another minute or so before we dive into the content of today, meaningful philanthropy. And already some of you, oh, chat is disabled. Nune, thank you. I am so sorry. Then we've got Q&A, folks. I apologize about chat being disabled. For now, I guess because we're very close to the downbeat of our Q&A, we will just, oh, folks are answering in Q&A. Alexis Pramberger, Long Island, New York. So glad you're here. Maureen Funk, Sutter Creek, California. So glad to see you, everyone. I guess we just spitballed and worked it out from there. Who else is here? Cynthia, Carbondale, Colorado. Terry Conrad, good to see you all. I'm so pleased you joined us here for our relaunch of On Giving. It is about 2 minutes after 12, and so I think I'd like to get started. Our guest, Jen Shang, is tremendously powerful speaker, so let's start. Hello, friends. Welcome to On Giving, incisive commentary and analysis at the intersection of philanthropy and the greater good. I'm Liz Newpel, President and CEO of Skystone Partners, where we believe philanthropy is a powerful force for good. Before we begin our conversation with Dr. Jen Shang, I'd like to touch on just a couple of housekeeping items. First, about format. I'll be interviewing Jen and her experiences with regards to this book, and then we'll have some discussion. We have a few minutes for select questions. A number of you have already submitted some of your questions via the registrations in advance. If you have additional questions, we will do our best. If you'd like to go ahead and enter them in the Q&A, we'd be delighted to have those additional questions. We'll get to them as best we possibly can. Our question moderator for today is Skystone Partners Senior Consultant, Adrienne Taylor, and she'll be curating a number of them along with the pre-submitted questions so that we have the opportunity to answer as many as we can without duplication. She's behind the scenes and she will join us for our Q&A. So, housekeeping out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, let's dig in. Today, we're talking with Dr. Jen Shang about her most recent work and the 2025 AFP Skystone Partners Prize for Research winner, Meaningful Philanthropy, The Person Behind the Giving, co-authored with Dr. Adrienne Sargent. I think Jen is in the wings and she's on her way out here. Dr. Shang is the world's first PhD in philanthropy. She's also the world's only philanthropic psychologist. Her research has been covered in the New York Times, BBC, The Guardian, The Chronicle of Philanthropy, Advancing Philanthropy, and the Nonprofit Times. Additionally, Jen has been published in numerous academic journals, and her research has been funded by nationally and internationally recognized organizations. Thanks, Jen.
It's very nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Today's conversation is not just about fundraising. It's about the psychology of philanthropy. Many of you know, good fundraisers have always understood the power of connecting donors to something greater than themselves. What Meaningful Philanthropy, her book right here, contributes is a structured, research-based framework that explains why this works and how to enhance it. It moves beyond intuition to formalize a model of donor identity, meaning-making, and self-transformation, offering new ways to think about donor engagement, retention, and long-term philanthropic relationships. In essence, This book elevates what great fundraisers like you already do by grounding it in philanthropic psychology and identity theory. It provides a new vocabulary and set of concepts to help fundraisers move beyond just inspiring gifts to helping donors experience philanthropy as a transformative life journey. Welcome, Jen. So glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So let's begin at the beginning. I think the heart of your research has to do, well, it's the title of the book, has to do with meaning. So what does it mean to say that philanthropy is meaningful?
Well, before I say anything, I must confess, Liz, that you summarized my work better than I could ever do. So thank you very much for that
I'll
introduction.
send you the blurb.
Yeah, it always put a smile on my face when people like yourself who practice philanthropy every day summarize my work in ways that it's just so intuitive to connect with. I was like, brilliant. Maybe I will interview Liz for the rest of the time. But anyway, meaningful philanthropy is intentionally we use that word not just because it is what is coming out of our 48 interviews of high and ultra high net worth individuals, but also it sets apart from the philanthropy that squarely focusing on impact.
Mhm.
What we learned about meaningful philanthropy is that when philanthropy is meaningful, the doing of philanthropy itself and the being of a philanthropist in and of itself, these doing and these being, they are meaningful to people, not just as a philanthropic set of activities they do on the side, but they're meaningful as part of who they are in their life. So if their philanthropy were to go away, even the doing of it, they will miss something that is central out of their lives. So philanthropy for them is not an add-on, but an essential part
Mhm.
of who they are. When people talk about philanthropy in that way, then you know they're experiencing meaningful philanthropy.
I just got goosebumps the way that you
Oh,
described that. We all seek meaning in our lives, whether it's from our work or our leisure time. And what I'm hearing from you is maybe we could have this. I mentioned too, work life, home life, but maybe there's this third bucket that we now talk about as the way that we experience philanthropy. We're talking about money, but that could certainly be meaningful philanthropy in volunteer hours, and without it, if you went away, you would feel a void in your soul.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. So I wonder, one of the things when we spoke before this interview, and it's the whole conversation spoke to me, but one of the things that really spoke to me when we had our conversation before was philanthropy as an expression of love. And that is also clear, and it's evident in the book that it is, giving is an expression of love. It's even the root of the word, love of your fellow man. Can you share an example from your research that really moved you? You had the opportunity to talk to 48 tremendously generous individuals. What was one of your ones that made you want to sit up and take notice?
Hmm. Can I have two,
Yes.
please? Okay, thank you. Um, they're both interestingly from mothers, like one of them is from a mother, the other one is from a mother to be. But one of them is from a philanthropist who used to be a professional nurse.
Mhm.
And that was the story when she shared about her visiting a village of child soldiers and how she rescued a child soldier who was forced to kill someone in his own village before he was he was made into a child soldier. And that's what was one of the project that she did.
Mhm.
But what really touched me about that story of love is when she described how she was standing by a rice field next to this child. And she just said to herself that, wow, this could have been my child. And that's the moment when she took this child into her heart for the first time. And then the second time when this child went deeper into her heart was when she arrived at home and looked at her own son at a similar age. And when she knelt down and hugged her own son, that connection that she had with the child soldier by the rice field went in a bit deeper.
Mhm.
And 20 years after that episode, when we had the conversation, tears just came down her cheeks when she was recalling that. And she would be saying, I had no idea that this experience impacted me that deeply that I would like still shed tears for it 20 years later. That's the kind of philanthropy that is deeply meaningful because not only they have become part of her life, but it's like an experience that kept on giving.
Mhm.
It can keep on becoming deeper and deeper as they age with us in our lives. And for this particular philanthropist, she wouldn't have never had an opportunity to appreciate the depths of the experience if she didn't take on a little kind act of participating in a research project. Who would have thought
Right.
how she would, actually experience the depth of that
Right.
experience?
So by saying yes to you in the research project, she revisited that moment in her life. And
Yeah,
that's an example of a, a time where she reached out, made a difference. And as you say, it's meaningful because she's carried it in her heart for.
yeah,
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 that's
absolutely.
tremendous. Yeah.
And the other example is on the other side of it, where it's a fifth generation wealth inheritor.
Hmm.
Her whole life was geared towards becoming a philanthropist because that's what she was born into. So she just trying to discover what kind of philanthropist that she wanted to be. And for her, human trafficking was her chosen field. She could have done anything anywhere in the world, and yet she chose, as a 28-year-old,
Hmm.
spent 8 years of her life in a third world country and be a social worker.
Hmm.
That's how she chose to live her life. But the gift that experience gave her was before she became a social worker, she didn't want to become a mother because she didn't feel like she could love a child in a way that she really wanted to love a child. But after 8 years, especially after seeing a 9-year-old girl that she loved as a mother almost, she felt like she loved the way that she loved the child. So
Hmm.
she looked forward to become a mother one day. So that kind of transformation of someone who was afraid to be a mother to
Hmm.
someone who wanted to be a mother. And for the reason of knowing that she has the capacity to love in a way that she wanted to love,
Yeah.
it's just beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's meaningful philanthropy as meaningful for life.
Yeah. So it really became, for both of these women,
Mm,
became a part of their identity,
absolutely.
which is actually, I think this is a new concept that you all have coined, that you've coined called identity seeding.
Mm,
And so you introduce this concept where donors allow their philanthropy to shape who they are. What
mm.
role? I'd love for you to talk about. Can you just talk about that a little bit? And then I have some questions that might be good follow-up questions. But I think this is so central to what uh, fundraising practitioners probably want to hear because it's that, this is part of my soul that makes the
Mm.
philanthropy meaningful. So let's talk about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I will follow up on the 28-year-old's story just to put some context into this concept of identity seeding. So in the example of the 28-year-old, when she went into her philanthropy, she was afraid to be a mother.
Hmm.
And if that's the identity that she kept
Hmm.
throughout her philanthropy and then walked out of from her philanthropy, then there's no seeding of her identity through the process. She remained the same.
Hmm.
And yet she didn't do that. She allowed the girls that she met to change her life.
Yeah.
She allowed the love that she had for the girls to transform her from somebody who was afraid to be a mother to somebody who would love to be a mother. That process of becoming someone different, letting go part of her that was not quite suited for what she need to become in order to succeed in their philanthropy. That's the essence of identity seeding, the
Right.
letting go and the becoming, but for the purpose of loving the people that their philanthropy touches.
Right. Right. So it is, I like the way you said it's a letting go
Mhm.
to accept a real personal and spiritual transformation. From a because I know you are the world's first and only so far philanthropic psychologist. Insert joke here for every development shop, right? Um, um, what what more does that tell us when we are connecting with our donors? What role can we play in helping people find that place? Because, one of the things that we say with our clients is fundraising isn't about the money. It's about collectively realizing a common vision, right? So what role do we play
Yeah.
in helping someone make that kind of a connection?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you go back to those two stories, those two ladies' story,
Hmm.
one thing we can say is if there's one thing on this planet that can't be forced is the feeling of love.
Hmm.
We can't force a mother's heart from not being a mother to being a mother. We can't force a child into a mother's heart to say, this is my child. It is something that people take to heart on their own initiative.
Hmm.
So the best that fundraisers can do is to keep them company in this journey. And when I say keep them company in this journey, I meant to encourage them to step into that space and to stay with them when they're trying to open their heart and to be there for them when their heart is open and sometimes they might be waiting to articulate what that opening of heart and the heart to heart connection might mean to them. So
Hmm.
just be a really loyal friend
Hmm.
in this journey with them, but be very sensitive to the opening and the closing of the heart and the condition of the heart so that they can, be that gentle steering or propelling as the heart is trying to open up.
Hmm.
I mean, for one of the most surprising thing that I have learned from this research is most of the most meaningful experience that people shared with us take about 10 years for the meaning to be articulated.
Hmm.
I knew like we all say, oh, it takes time and it takes relationships, but 10 years? I would not have predicted this before I walked into the research. It's just the time that it takes.
Hmm.
So as fundraisers, if we have our eyes capped on the length of time, that is a long way um, into what kind of company, what kind of patience, what kind of tentativeness that is required
Hmm.
to support someone to discover a deeply meaningful philanthropic experience.
So here's a question.
Hmm.
You use this word friend, and I use it in conversation a lot. I use it lightly, and I also use it in a very meaningful and heavy way as a person and a professional. And we are that accompanist. We are that one could describe it as a midwife for connection. to that deeper meaning. Someone already has to have an interest, right? Um, but that can get kind of sticky for fundraisers when we're talking about friendship. Very often we can become friends
Yeah.
to our donors, but it's not necessarily to be mistaken
Mhm.
for something that it isn't. And did any of the individuals that you interview, was the person who helped them find that deeper, more meaningful connection in their philanthropy, was the person or a person who helped them central, or were they not so central from your conversations? Part of the
All,
reason I'm
all,
asking, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jen.
almost all of them have very essential individuals during their journey of philanthropy to make their philanthropy meaningful.
Hmm.
Sometimes these people ask meaningful questions.
Hmm.
Sometimes these people make meaningful connections for them.
Hmm.
Sometimes they are professional philanthropic personnels like CEOs, executive trustees, and fundraisers.
Hmm.
Other times they're family and friends and specialized coaches or even therapists. Like all of them have had significant individuals in their lives to help the birthing of the meaning in their lives.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I think on one hand, when I talk about being a friend, um, I'm talking about the attitude
Hmm.
of serving them
Hmm.
with the attitude of putting their ideas and benefits first in every situation. At the same time, we don't need to shy away from the reality that most of these donors, I would say almost all of them, recognize that fundraising is a profession.
Hmm.
They know what it comes with,
Hmm.
but they are still the difference between the fundraisers that they rely on as a friend versus the fundraisers that they work with in a professional capacity in and of itself.
Right. So they recognize the difference.
Absolutely.
They understand we're professionals, and we need to remember that as professionals too. But
Absolutely.
we're there as a friend, accompanying them on their journey, walking next to them on their journey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
What else, before we dive into a couple of other things that I'm thinking about relative to meaningful philanthropy, what else should we in this audience be thinking about as it relates to identity seeding? We sometimes are the midwives, so to speak. We are the accompaniment. Um, the greatest meaning comes from the letting go of one thing to accept something new into your heart that really changes your life. What else should we be thinking about?
Um, the more I spent time myself in thinking about what people have shared, the more I become appreciative of the very nuanced and subtle word choices that people make
Ah,
when they express their experience. So I think as we watch the opening of hearts and the deepening of meaning, we want to pay very nuanced and subtle attention to people's word choices. And we want to become very sensitive to when these words shifts.
and what would you say, what is the shift that we're looking for? How
Yes.
do we know the language?
Yeah, I would give you an example that one of the interviewees gave us when they worked in an area where they serve a highly religious community in a highly volatile environment. And what they want to do in that environment is to help the local youth to learn music, which to the, you know, majority of the individuals that we have encountered in our own lives music means anything from songs, lyrics, classical music, ballet, opera. You think about it, that's kind of what music means. But it took him quite a while before he got to understand that for this particular community, when they said the word music, they meant psalms in a religious setting, because those are the only situations that these children have ever been exposed to music. So when this secular nonprofit used the word music, they automatically translate it into psalms and worship music, versus they meant classical music.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
they had to change the word of their program to properly convey the meaning. But it took the person quite a while before it even occurred to him that this word, it doesn't mean the same thing. And he said during his long career in philanthropy, this kind of thing happens on a very regular basis, like from the beginning of his philanthropy to today, which, you know, um, spread about 2 decades. So it's not like, oh, we get to know a community, we didn't know them 20 years ago, and today we know them, and so we don't need to pay attention to these things. It's like that mother's deepening. When something is that deep, they can become 100 times deeper the next day, right? So it's not um a a process where change can ever stop.
Mhm.
So if we can train ourselves to become very sensitive to these very small changes that could potentially can happen at any point in a person's philanthropic journey,
Mhm.
then we can have the potential to have real significant breakthroughs uh,
Mhm.
for meaning creation in their.
Right. So when we're listening to our donors in how they're experiencing the work that our organization does, and
Mm,
when those changes, and that is all about getting to know when you think about you're getting to know your donors in your
absolutely.
portfolio. It's all about being with them, understanding who they are, how they communicate, what kind of language they use, and being highly attuned. So there may
Mhm.
be moves management that we can do, but we can't just crank it out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, in the first two cases, I would say what the word mother means to the person
Mhm.
as a mother, and what the word mother means to the person in the context of their philanthropy. I mean, being able to define those two words in different stages of their philanthropy
Mm,
as an anchor to help them deepen their philanthropic experience is can be hugely impactful
mhm,
to steer one's philanthropic experience one way or the other.
mhm. So in our role, if we understand meaning making, identity building, in our role, we might experience it as fundraisers where it seems like the donor is stuck.
Hmm.
Just about before, just there's something that's going on with them. Just
Yeah,
about before there is that next dive into an even tighter interwoven relationship with our organization and our work. They may struggle for expressing themselves
absolutely.
because they are making a new identity. They're formulating a new identity
Mhm.
kind of on the fly.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
when we feel our donors, whom we understand are really deeply feeling what we're doing,
Mm.
come to that spot where they are stuck.
Mhm.
We can help them put new words to it, even if our words are wrong. Sometimes that can flip a switch. Is that say, how you might imagine us in the fundraising profession being able to help our donors to that next step of more meaningful philanthropy?
Absolutely. There are two sides to it. One side is to pay very special attention to the points where you can ask very insightful questions.
Mhm.
And I think coming up with meaningful questions is always more inviting than prescribing what the answer might be. So it is about thinking about the right questions to ask to help propel them forward.
Ah, yeah.
But at the same time, I think whenever we're encountering an individual, it is always helpful to explicitly ask ourselves, one, whether we think they're ready, and two, whether we think we're ready. And if we assess that when either party is not ready, um, including time into the ingredients of our cooking is a really important element.
What do you mean when you say we need to be cognizant as to when they're ready and when we're ready? What do you mean by when we're ready?
It takes a caller to call out a calling. So if we do not possess the kind of presence that would call some identity out of someone, then we need to respect that we may not be the right person to make that call. So when we assess whether we're the right person to make the call, it is not necessarily to say, oh, if I'm not the person to make the call, the only thing I can do is to wait. The other side of it. Can you hear my printer?
Teeny bit, but it's not distracting.
Okay, good. The other thing the other reason why it's helpful is if you do explicitly ask yourself, am I the right person or am I ready? You're more likely to find the right person who is ready, and you're more likely to identify what needs to happen in order for you to be ready.
Mhm. Mhm.
And very often, like I said, all of them, almost all of them, have important in their lives to propel their meaning forward. Almost all of them have individuals who are able to ask the right questions in the right circumstances at the right time.
Mhm.
I think that takes a lot of discernment to decide who is the right person to ask that question.
Right, right. And I think sometimes we just know. I mean, fundraising, I don't want to diminish it to say, but I will say fundraising is a little bit like dating, or it's a little bit like making friends. We used that word earlier.
Mhm.
And sometimes there's something that you're dying to know about the other person to that you imagine would bring that relationship closer, but you don't trust yourself to ask that question yet. And that's a little bit like what you're talking about. And then the question becomes, do I need the ingredient of time or do I need the ingredient of a different person?
Absolutely. And at that particular point, I would say the purity of motivation is a really, really important thing to tease out. Going back to our conversation about being a friend, are
Mhm.
you asking that question for the goodness of that person in front of you as a human being? Or are you asking that question for the advancement of some kind of movement towards a fundraising goal? The same exact question, when asked with different motive, can make the world of difference.
Ah, how so? Ooh, there's a little seed there. What I could imagine is if I were a major gift officer, senior major gift officer in an organization where I have a portfolio size and I have quarterly expectations and I have all of these demands to produce, um, how do I manage that? Because
With great
my
difficulty.
job, what?
With great difficulty.
And grace, I imagine, I hope.
Yeah.
How do I manage that? Because I, as a fundraiser, I might be an informal psychologist, so to speak, but I'm not officially their mental health care professional, right?
Mhm.
That's not my job. My job is to bring resources to my organization.
Absolutely. And your job is also to build trust.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
between the philanthropist and the organization.
Yes.
And in order to build trust, the person need to trust that you live the love that you say you raise money for.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that is a lot more impactful than presenting highly impactful research results, right? If the donors don't feel you walk the walk, then the numbers again don't have meaning.
Mhm.
It might be impact, but it's not impact delivered in trusting relationships.
And so my next question that I'm going to dangle but not ask you to answer, we could do a whole session on how to make the case to our boss that we are building meaningful relationships that will create transformational meaning for our donors and then therefore for our organizations. That is bigger than what I think we can wrangle today. Before we go to our audience submitted questions, I have one final one. So if we take this research seriously, which I believe that we should, that love, meaning, and identity are at the center of giving, what does that mean for the future of philanthropy?
Exponential growth
Mhm.
over a very long period of time.
Through those deep, trusting, meaningful relationships that
Yep.
are mutually beneficial, where we're seeking to realize a common vision.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Adrian Taylor, my friend, what questions have our audience members submitted to us? I know there have been a number of thoughtful ones. We'll get to as many as we can.
Yes, let's get it started. I want to, because the title of the book is Meaningful Philanthropy, and philanthropy, we're talking about all the T's, time, talent, treasure. I know there's 2 to 3 more additional T's that can be added on. But we did get a lot of questions around volunteerism and meaningful philanthropy. So I'm going to kind of make this question in 2 parts. We got a question about strategies to motivate volunteer solicitors. So those who are going in that space and saying, yes, I have no problem asking for dollars. And then the second one is about, is there a different set of motives that drive those other tenets of meaningful philanthropy, such as time and talent?
Hmm. I will answer the second one first. And if by the time I come to it, I forgot what the first one is, let me remind me. But are there any different motives between giving money, talent versus time? It depends on how meaningful the philanthropy is. The more meaningful the philanthropy is, the more similar the motives are. For the most meaningful philanthropic engagement, people have exactly the same motive because they give everything they've got, money, time, talent, to the same thing. And it's part of their life, and their life is holistic in those experiences, is coherent, is one piece. So the more deeply meaningful experience we can create for people, the simpler our job becomes actually, because they become all very similar. Now, in terms of meaningful solicitations, I would say solicitation is a very specific set of skills. So getting to the meaningful part of philanthropy is one set of skill that this book specializes in. But to translate that meaningful experience into a meaningful solicitation, that is a completely different set of skill that this book does not touch on at all.
Got it. Thank you for that. And I took away from this, like, if you can really strike a note on one of those T's, it's almost like the other T's will follow because you've just done so well, whether it's engaging them through their talent or their time, the whole thing comes in place.
Yeah.
Let's talk about stewardship now. So we've done volunteerism. Let's go into stewardship. And we got a question about what is stewardship's part in meaningful philanthropy?
Is to, like you sometimes have those really good chocolate or coffee, depending on your preference, and you can think about your favorite food in this situation, is the aftertaste after people have got a really good piece of chocolate. And stewardship is let's make sure we get the last bit of taste out of that piece of chocolate.
That analogy. I was thinking about French fries, and I'm like, that last bite, you get to savor it. I love that analogy. I love that.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull another question directly from one of our audience members joining us today. In your research, did you discover any differences in how women and men find meaning in their philanthropy?
Oh, that's really interesting. Like that actually is my second biggest surprise from the research, which is no, because I actually went into the research hoping that I would find differences. And then as I talk, it literally like I would be sitting in here listening to a female philanthropist. I was like, I feel like I'm talking to a man, and vice versa. Like I would be talking to a male philanthropist, and I sit there, I was like, I think I feel like I'm sitting here and talking to a woman. And then so like after a few experiences like that, I don't walk into it with expectation anymore because they are just who they are and they'll be who they want to be. Yeah, it's no is the answer. What does make a difference though is how reflective and how experienced and how skillful and how knowledgeable they are in carrying out their self-reflections. It's like we might go into a situation thinking that females are somehow more emotive and they process information in more emotive ways and they are more aware. But no, like males who have been trained on those skills, they can have equally sophisticated processes and vice versa. Like if females, they have never been trained on that, they don't exhibit those qualities of emotive giving experiences.
Wow. I think I was expecting you to say that there was a difference as well. So I guess we both headed into this same, because I think from the very beginning, as young fundraisers, we are taught that women make all the philanthropic decisions in the family. So we come in with these their biases about philanthropy and gender. But you have corrected that myth in a way through your own experiences going into this research. Um, I'm going to go back again to another audience member's question, and they said it was mentioned that the challenges that professional fundraisers experience, that donors are able to recognize those as well. How can fundraisers bridge that gap of some of those barriers or challenges that we are experiencing as fundraisers? And I'm assuming that some of the challenges are, of course, portfolios might be too big, pressures of trying to get the dollars in the door, and donors are becoming more savvy and are picking up on some of those things. What are your thoughts on that, Doctor?
Honesty in sharing and depth in sharing. And I think I wanted to also go back to the gender question. I think these two questions can be addressed in the same way. And it goes back to the purity of motivation, right? In any conversation we carry out, we can always ask ourselves, are we carrying this conversation out with the best interest of the donor in mind as a human being, not just as someone who give our organization money? We can spend the same length of time, like 30 minutes we have on a donor. If the entire 30 minutes we spend on it, our focus is how can I close my next solicitation? The kind of information we get from the same 30 minutes is not going to be the same as if we allow ourselves the freedom to try to understand what would serve the donor best as a human being. And I think that is why I perhaps didn't find any gender differences. I think it is not to say that other people won't experience gender differences, because the reason why I didn't experience gender differences could simply be that I was just interested in each individual as a person. And when you really go with that angle, um, it's almost like you discover the shortest and the simplest way to get to who that person is. And when you get to that person, all these other categories fall away. They become just very insignificant when you've discovered who the person actually is. And so you just serve each individual as an individual.
Which I think is kind of the best type of stewardship out there. If we get the opportunity to really personalize, I like to say personalize over customize, because you could customize broadly, but personalization takes a little bit of effort there.
It's the hardest thing I found in working with fundraisers and philanthropists is not necessarily the fact that we don't know what the right thing to do is, but the fact that we can't do the right thing even if we want to because of the pressure. And I think that is why it is really important for fundraisers not only to apply what I write in the book for their donors, but first and foremost to apply what I write in the book in their own lives, to love themselves first before they love their donors. And I would say, if possible, if you have 30 minutes, spend the first 2 minutes loving yourself in this situation, despite of the pressure. You are worth the 2 minutes out of the 30.
I love that. I'm gonna steal a phrase from Liz and just say I got goosebumps. I'm thinking about that. I mean, because and I think this will lead into our next question, because of everything that we're experiencing, such as research saying there's a decrease in the number of donors, that also adds another layer of pressure, and taking that moment to center ourselves and making sure that we are grounded as the fundraisers, so that we can be a foundation for our donors is important. But did you see within your research, leaning going into the decreasing trend that we're seeing around donors giving year after year, are you seeing this in your research at the ultra and high ultra net worth donors as well?
No, I mean, all the people that we interviewed in this research, they're not resource constrained. On one hand, like they don't talk about constraints in resources in the sense that there's not enough that they can't give. All of them are attempting to tackle problems that are beyond their financial means, meaning they're tackling deep, complex societal problems. So are they resource constrained? Yes, they are, but that is because of what they're after. And that is why it is really, really important for them to come to the kind of meaning that they would stand in the gap, even if they can't achieve their philanthropic impact during their lifetime.
Is it safe to assume that these types of donors tend to have that abundance mindset versus that scarcity mindset then?
Um, that is not what I'm seeing. What I am seeing is that all of them are tackling problems that are beyond their means, and all of them are being approached by people to the extent that the demand is always higher than the supply. But in that environment, people can choose to use either an abundant or a scarcity mindset to approach these situations. And there is a difference in which mindset they use in how they experience the meaningfulness of their philanthropy.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that for me. Liz, I know before I jumped in with my clarifying question, you were about to say something. I want to make sure.
Well, I thought it was really interesting what Jen said about none of these people are resource constrained, except that they are. And it brings us back to one of the things that we learn as young fundraisers, which is we want to help people become a part of something that is bigger than themselves, right? And so societally, it's bigger than themselves. And I think what Jen is saying is the individuals it was very profound to me, right? It's bigger than themselves as a human. And for many of us, their resources are unconstrained. They're unimaginable to many individuals. And yet it is still bigger than them, not just like from a soul perspective. So I think that's very interesting. And they're being asked to do it again and again, solve these huge, huge problems. And I think it's interesting as a human. Um, to continuously grow and change because we know we are only growing as humans
Mhm.
when we are uncomfortable, when there's something that is outside of our reach. And I think this comes back to the meaningful philanthropy. It is we don't want to never attain anything, but it is something so much bigger than ourselves that even those individuals who your day-to-day person might think has no constraints in money or time or resources in any capacity, that may be where many people are finding that meaning is this is so much bigger than me. And I don't know, it clicked in my head. I don't know if it's also clicking for the two of you, but
I
yeah.
think there is that fine balance between being part of something greater versus this is my part
Hmm.
in this something greater, right? If the
Yeah.
only thing that we can create for our donors is that you are now part of this something greater, then they lose themselves.
Hmm.
Versus if they choose to say, this is my part in this something
My role.
greater.
Yeah.
This is my spot. This is my life. And this is the gap I choose to stand in.
Hmm.
And even though they're part of something bigger, they're indispensable. And that's where they find meaning in their own lives, even when they're part of something much bigger.
Hmm.
So I think, like as fundraisers, we want to be very skillful in helping donors articulate very clearly why you are that special person
Hmm.
who is standing in this special bigger place.
Right. And to me, that brings up two very, and I'm going to toss it back over to you, Adrian, because I know we have a lot of audience questions, but that brings me to two very tactical things that we use in fundraising. And one is the scale of gifts, and the other one is naming opportunities. You may give an unrestricted gift, but you want to put your name somewhere, and it's not necessarily because you just want your name in neon flashing lights. It's because that is part of you. That is part of, if you were a school teacher and you are giving to a campaign that has an educational component and you spent years of your life doing that, you will want to be associated with that. That's my piece in the greater part of a project. And also as it relates to the scale of gift is I might not be able to give that $20 million lead gift, but I can give $1 million, or I can give $500,000, I can give $10,000. So I know I'm part of something greater than myself. And here is my piece of real estate, both from a naming opportunity as well as understanding where my dollars make a difference. And I think that we can help our donors, whether they're that $50 million donor or that 10,000 or $500 donor, with those same kinds of things. How do you want to be associated? And look at how much difference you and 49 other people have to do this, or whatever it is. But back to you, Adrian, for maybe one last audience question.
Yes, one last audience question, and I found another theme in some of the questions around generational giving, the transfer of wealth, and if there is anything within this research that fundraisers need to think about when they find a high net worth donor, that we are very aware that they're going to be transferring wealth down to a family member? What are some things that maybe keep in mind with this research?
Oh, I will finish the session in the same way that I started, which is what is the one story that touched me most when I was doing this research in terms of generational differences. It is not surprising for people to say, a lot of time the younger generation who are wealth inheritors discover their own identity through philanthropy. And that is an entirely different process than um, the first generation wealth generators, where their identity is firmly grounded in their journey of becoming wealthy. And then philanthropy has no other option but to become their second identity, which they need to transform into. But what I found really heartwarming, speaking with the second generation high and ultra high net worth individuals, is the love that they have for their family. Is when they choose to cede their own identity for the unity of the family and for the care of other people's, like other family members' well-being. That really touched me. How deeply these individuals think about, on one hand, it is about discovering their own identities, but on the other, it's also about loving their family, how the identity that they develop can best nurture the system of the family that they live in. So it's not necessarily about the expression of their individual family within the family system, but it is about how to seed the identity that they have developed through the philanthropic opportunities to the philanthropic identities of the older generation, the grandparents' generation, or the next generation that come up. So it is when they begin to say, yeah, my identity and discovering my identity is important, but it is also important for me to become someone that my family need me to be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I've seen that a lot of times when a younger generation joins a family foundation board, for example. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, thank you, Jen. And so before we wrap up today, what is the one insight from your research that you hope stays with our audience today?
Fundraising is such a beautiful profession. The love that you seed every day can so profoundly change lives. So I hope that you all stay in fundraising forever. And so you can see all the fruits that you are growing decades down the line.
Thank you. Wow. That's a lot. Thank you. This has been a really generous and insightful conversation. Thank you all participants for being here today. Thank you, Jen, for your thoughts. We'll send you all a follow-up email with the recording, links to Jen's book, and additional resources. And we all really appreciate your contributions to the field, Jen. Adrian, thank you for moderating the questions today. And thank you to Amber Gallagher for producing today's broadcast. She's been behind the scenes. Please, y'all, stay connected with us. Continue the conversation about centering love and identity in philanthropy. We look forward to seeing you next time. And you can join us for our next On Giving on Tuesday, July the 8th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you. Go forth, do good work, and remember, philanthropy is a powerful force for good.